Sam wears like a full respirator everywhere with goggles.
Dina's wearing a surgical mask below his nose.
Hello and welcome back to Super Hell, aka the Mystery Spotcast, a show where two recovering Supernatural fans subject themselves to a rewatch so no one else ever has to watch Supernatural again. We must once again reiterate, do not watch this show. We are suffering for your enjoyment and so that no one else has to do it. My name is Klaudia. My pronouns are she, her. You can find me on social media at Klaudia Says, K-A-L-U-D-I-A Says.
And my name is Ollie. I use any pronouns, and you can find me on social media at Ollie Fresh. That's fresh with a PH. Let's get into it.
Oh, season 2.
Season 2, you're full of just mixed emotions.
Season 2 is the definition of supernatural whiplash, where we go from absolute highs to absolute lows, sometimes in the same episode.
Yeah, this is one of those episodes that, like, the two that we're talking about today have moments that I'm like, oh, this is awesome, and then I'm like, oh, immediately this is not good.
Yeah, like the first one we're gonna talk about is like a very memorable episode, and one that I was like, oh, like very key to the whole thing, to both the like overarching story and also just like a very memorable, like, it's a bottle episode, essentially, very memorable episode, whatever, but it's also extremely problematic. Let's just get that out of the way in the beginning.
Yeah, this first episode, and honestly, both of them have some things that are not great about them.
Yeah.
I'll say the first episode we're going to be talking about today is season 2, episode 9, Croatoan, so that may give you guys a bit of an idea of what is the deal with that. So yeah.
I just, in the episode, they talk a lot about, like, oh, the mystery of Croatoan and whatever, and, like, even then, when this show was made, like, there were scholars who knew. Nowadays, especially with the internet, whatever, now more people know, like, no, they weren't lost. It wasn't a lost colony. Like, we know where those people went. If you guys know the story of Croatoan and the lost colony of Roanoke and all that shit.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend, like, looking that up.
Yeah.
Like, the lost colony of Roanoke, just so that you can have some context. They will be able to explain it better than we can.
Yeah. Because what they say in the show is just, like, objectively wrong. And it's very funny, because Sam is like, well, did you pay attention in class? I'm like, did you? Did you, Sam?
Yeah, because apparently Sam did not. But for those of you, if you don't know, basically, there was a colony in Roanoke, and then the head of the colony, like one of the men, left and then got stuck fighting in a war in England, and then they came back and were like, there's no one here. Like, literally everyone's gone. And they found a carving of the word Croatoan. And it's this huge mystery today. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, what happened to them? And it's like, well, people are like, oh my gosh, maybe they were all killed by spirits, or maybe they were attacked by the indigenous population. Well, it's like, no, that is not what happened. Just let's all be clear. Like, there's prevailing research says that they probably just assimilated into like tribes of indigenous people, or went to one of the islands nearby because their resources were drawing thin, because the supplies that they needed were stuck in the war. Yeah.
And there was, like, the name of a few ethnic groups around there was also Croatoan, so they're like, yeah, they probably just left them a message of, like, where they went, but from then on, it became fucking American folklore, and you're like, okay, but yeah.
This episode has its own explanation, which, again, it's very much giving, like, I think something, too, about this issue is it is such a part of the American, like, zeitgeist. Like, it's, if you really dig into it, you do see, like, how the roots are very problematic. But looking at it from just, like, I don't want to say an uninformed standpoint, because that's not really what I mean, but from when you're not thinking about it super deeply, it is such a phenomenon, and it is such a big, like, legend that you don't really realize those roots a lot of the time. So I'm a little bit hesitant to be like, this episode is bad and deals with a bad thing, like, deals with it poorly, because, again, it's such, like, a cultural piece of folklore that it's, like, I know it was not like, oh, we read this story and then we're like, whatever,
Yeah, it was probably just like, oh yeah, we heard of this thing. Wouldn't it be cool if we made an episode involving it? This episode is linked to the rest of the like overarching plot line, and I feel like that would be the more problematic piece of it. It's like, fine, if you want to spin off, okay, but like the ways that they connect it to the overarching plot line that has a lot to do with obviously Christian imagery, because this is Bible fan fiction we're talking about, that's I guess a little dicey for me. And the
I get that
stuff that's where it gets a little dicey for me. That being said, this is a recurring problem with Supernatural. The purpose of this episode is to be the zombie episode. Because they kind of haven't really had that yet. They've done kind of all the different kind of monsters and ghosts and typical things, but they haven't really had a zombie disease kind of episode, and this is the one that eventually we were gonna get to.
Let's get into it. We'll explain, and then you will understand, and it won't just be the two of us having a conversation without the listener. Let's get into it. So, this episode is a doozy of a cold open. We see Dean, and he is in this, what appears to be some sort of exam room, and he looks very upset. He's holding a gun. And there's a big poster on the wall that says, River Grove on it. And basically Dean is like, I'm gonna do it. And he's holding a gun up to this young man's head, and everyone's like, are you gonna do it? Do you have to do it? The guy's like, please, it's not in me, I promise it's not in me. And he's like, we don't know that. And there's like a doctor there, and she's freaking out, and everyone's just kind of losing their minds. And then Dean shoots this guy, and then Sam kind of shoots up, and we realize that he was having a vision. Then Sam relays the vision to Dean, and he's like, we have to go to this place, River Grove. There's only 2 places named River Grove in the world. That looked like the poster that I saw in the background of this vision, so we need to go there now. So they're going there, and Dean's like, this feels kind of silly. Like, do you think this has to do with the demon? Because, like, all of your little visions have to do with the demon. And Sam is like, well, I don't know, but I guess we'll find out.
At this conversation, I was like, yeah, duh, obviously.
Yeah, like, no shit, dude.
Yeah. No, maybe it's just fucking... Come on, man.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, man. Yeah, you do. So they pull up to River Grove, Oregon, and they see, like, a sign that's like, welcome, and it's the same sign that Sam saw on the poster. And they stumble across a telephone pole, and on the side of it, the word Croatoan is carved into it. And Sam is like, oh my gosh, you know Croatoan? Like the lost colony of Roanoke? And Dean's like, what is that? And he's like, did you not pay attention in school? And Dean's like, no, I remember, like, how Bill becomes a law. I remember, like conjunctions. And Sam was like, that's not school, that's Schoolhouse Rock.
They've been waiting to make that joke. They've been waiting.
Yeah. But they start kind of talking about, like, what happened there and how all the people went missing and no one knows where they went. Okay, sure.
Yeah, so in this explanation, they're like, oh, they don't really know what happened. It might have been something demonic or something like that. And in that moment, Sam's like, hey, this might be kind of serious. Maybe we should get some backup. Maybe we should call Joe, or maybe we should call Joe or Ellen or Bobby or something like that. And Dean's like, great idea. And they check their phones and they're like, there's no signal.
That's so weird. There's no signal. Anyway, let's move on with our lives. And then they go to this telephone pole and there's no signal there too. And they're like, oh, cool. So there's just no way to contact anyone outside of town. That's weird. Anyway, we should go look for that guy from the vision. So they are, like, looking around. They find this guy who's, like, kind of sitting on his porch, just kind of hanging out. And I think he's wearing, like, a hat that signifies he's a veteran. And they walk up and they're like, hey, we're here from the
They say they're U.S. Marshals.
They say
even though they're dressed completely normally.
Yeah. So they're like, yeah, we're U.S. Marshals. We're looking for someone who's like blonde, has a scar above his eyebrow, about this tall, like describing the guy from Sam's dream. And the guy's like, who are you? And they're like, we're U.S. Marshals. And he's like, well, I don't know. He's a good boy. He has not done anything wrong. Like, you're looking for Dwayne Tanner. And is he in trouble? And they're like, no, there's a case. We need to do some follow-up. We just need to ask him a couple questions. And the guy's like, oh, I don't know, I guess. And then Dean is like, oh, well, my dad was a veteran too, and kind of has a little moment of like, my dad was in the army. So
Dean.
Then he tells them, yeah. Then he tells them where their house is. And they're like, okay, cool, we'll go there. So they go to this house and they knock on the door. And there's this like teenage boy, and he answers, and they're like, oh, hey, is Dwayne here? And he's like, oh, my brother's out on a fishing trip, but I can like, and they're like, oh, do you know when he'll get back? And he's like, oh, I can ask my mom and dad. And then the dad walks up and he's like, oh yeah, well, can we like, yeah, no, he's out on a fishing trip, can we get your phone numbers and maybe he can call you back? And they're like, oh no, we'll just stop in again. And they're like, oh, can we talk to like you and your wife about what Dwayne's situation is, just so that we can have context? And he's like, oh, she's not here. She went to the grocery store. And they're like, oh, well, your son just told us she was here. And he's like, oh, nope, she left. We're gonna go back inside now. Goodbye. And Sam and Dean are like, they close the door. Sam and Dean are like, no, that's not right. That something is wrong. So they kind of like sneak around the house and are looking in the back window, and they see the mother like tied up in a chair. And the father and the brother are like standing there over her, and the dad cuts the brother, his son's arm, and then he holds his bloody arm over a scrape on his mother's arm and lets the blood drip into it. And she's like screaming, crying, like trying, like being like, what are you doing? What's going on? Sam and Dean see this happening. They kick down the door. The dad tries to attack them and they shoot him. And the brother jumps out a window and escapes. And Sam has him lined up in his sights, but he doesn't shoot. And Dean's like, why didn't you shoot? And he's like, because he was like 15. I'm not going to shoot a random 15-year-old. So then they take this woman to like a medical center.
It's basically like a small town urgent care.
Yeah, it's literally like a clinic. But they take her and her husband's body like there, and they meet this doctor and drop her off.
They have this very funny moment where Dean has like the body over his back, and she's like, who are you guys? He's like, we're U.S. Marshals. I would show you my badge, but I have a body across my back.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay.
She's like, oh, cool. Okay. So they let them in, and the doctor's like tending to the wife, and she's like crying. She's freaking out. She's like, I don't know what happened. Like, they were just like my son and my husband one moment, and then the next moment they tied me up and were like attacking me. I just have no idea like what is going on. It doesn't make sense. And the doctor is like to Dean, she's like, okay, so yeah, so I was looking at Mrs. Tanner's blood, and it looks like some sort of like virus, which is weird because all it does is leave like this sulfuric residue behind.
Like, and Sam's like, oh no, yeah, not sulfur.
Sam and Dean are like, oh my god, it's a fucking demonic virus. She's like, okay, so what is happening? Because you just killed my neighbor. So like, what is going on here? And they're like, that's a great question. So we're not entirely sure, but we're gonna keep you guys safe, okay? And she's like, cool. Dean is like, yeah, we're gonna figure it out. Sam, you should stay here. I'm gonna leave to go get help and figure something out, like get a call out. And he's telling Sam, like, I'm gonna go call, like, Ellen and Bobby and let them know what the fuck is going on in this town, because, like, something's not right. And also, I'm gonna go look for Dwayne Tanner while I'm out to see if I can find where he's fishing with his friends, because he knows more. Like, we saw him in your vision. Clearly, he knows something. We need to find him. So Dean leaves, and he's driving, like, he comes up to this bridge, and there's a roadblock. And he's like, oh, that's weird. And a guy comes up next to him, next to his car, and he knocks on the window, and Dean rolls down the window, and he's like, hey, yeah, it looks like the road's actually closed here. And Dean's like, yeah, that's weird. Why? And he's like, oh, it's quarantine. There's quarantine, so you can't leave. And he's like, oh, cool. The guy's like, you should get out of your car and we'll talk. And he's like, no offense, you're a good looking dude, but I don't swing that way. I'm like, okay,
I was like,
Dean.
okay, Dean. And why did you phrase it like that?
Yeah, he's fighting back. He's fighting so hard, and the allegations are beating his ass. But Dean looks up, and he realizes that the brother who was at the house, who was attacking his mother, is there, and he's holding a gun. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. So he's like, yeah, I'm actually, like, not gonna be getting out of my car. Goodbye. And he goes backwards, like, he backs out as fast as possible as he's being shot at. And he's like, no. So he's driving like 1,000,000 miles an hour in the town, like, fuck, I cannot leave. And then he's trying to go back into town, and there's a guy holding up, like, a sniper rifle. And he's like, don't move. And Dean's like, oh, fuck. So he's like, get out of the car. So Dean gets out of the car, and he's like, are you one of them? And he's like, no. Are you? And he's like, no.
It's the veteran guy from the start that they saw on the porch.
It is. And then Dean pulls out his gun. So they just both have their guns drawn on each other. And he's like, okay, well, I'm not infected. And Dean's like, well, I'm not infected.
So when Sarge has a gun pointed on Dean, he's like, yeah, my neighbor, Mr. Rogers. And Dean, with a gun pointed back at him, goes, you have a neighbor named Mr. Rogers? And he goes, not anymore.
I know, I'm like,
they've been waiting to do that one.
Sarge, you were so slay. Sarge is kind of cunty. And he's like, okay, interesting. Cool. So let's just go back to the medical center together and figure out what's going on. But they're driving, and they both have their guns pointed at each other the whole time. And Dean's like, well, this won't be a tense ride at all.
It's very funny. It's very like that scene in The Office when they're all pointing the finger guns at each other. That's all I could think about.
Yeah. So they go back to the medical center, and the people in the center at this point are Sam Dean, this guy, Sarge, who is an ex-Marine, actually, the doctor, and a nurse who works there. And the nurse is, like, a younger girl, and she's kind of freaking out because she's like, my boyfriend's out there, like, I need to leave. Like, I'm freaking out. Like, something crazy is going on. And Sam is like, no, you cannot leave. You need to stay here. You're going to be safe. It's fine. The best thing we can do is wait. Help is coming. And this is when Dean pulls up, and he's like, so actually, guys, help is not coming. We cannot leave town. So they get in, and they are kind of, like, hanging out. And then the mother from earlier, Dwayne Tanner's mother, Mrs. Tanner, is like, ha ha ha, and just starts attacking them. And they're like, oh, cool, she's trying to kill us. So they lock her up in a room because she's strong, but she can't beat all 5 of these people in a fight. So they lock her up in this room, and they're talking about, like, what they're gonna do. And Sarge is like, no, because these people, these things that are, whatever is going on with them, they only get stronger as time passes. So, like, we need to kill her. Like, we have to take her out. And Dean's like, that feels, like, kind of crazy, right? And the doctor and the nurse are like, you can't just, like, kill our neighbor. What? Like, you can't just kill people. And they're like, well, she's gonna kill us. So they go in, and Dean just shoots this woman in the head. Like,
yeah, they don't really address that later.
No, like, this woman, to be fair, she did have some sort of affliction. But then the doctor who's there, like, cut the scene. The doctor's here. And she's like, well, it looks like the transfer is done via blood. But it doesn't manifest in this, like, mania until 4 hours after the infection. And Sam is like, oh my god, Dad had a theory in his journal that Croatoan is, now get this.
Dad was on conspiracy.
No, Dad is not have is John Winchester. You should just, I'm happy he's already dead because I can't wish more death upon him. John Winchester's journal posits that Croatoan is the name of a demon associated with plague and pestilence, and calls whatever's going on, quote, demonic germ warfare.
Especially when it really is just the name of a tribe. I'll kill you, John.
No, literally, John Winchester, you deserve the death penalty.
All of that research and you couldn't have gone, oh, it's the name of a tribe. Okay.
Yeah. And what sucks too is that he's right in this situation.
Yeah, in
and
the
I'm
lore of Supernatural, and you're like, oh, I hate you. I hate you, sir.
Yeah. But they are kind of like, everyone's starting to freak out, like, a little bit. The besties who are in there are starting to be like, like, the nurse is getting a little bit frazzled, and, like, she puts her hand down where Mrs. Tanner was, and, like, where there was, like, a blood sample of hers. And she's like, oh my god, did I touch it? Did I just get infected? And they're like, no, I think you're fine. Remember that for later.
This whole episode is, and that's a Mousecatool we'll use for later.
It is. Then we hear a knocking at the door. And they go to check it out. And Sarge is like, oh my god, it's Dwayne Tanner, the guy that you are asking about. And Sam was like, oh my god, it's the guy from my vision. And he's, like, outside, and he's like, I was out of town fishing, and I just got back, and, like, everyone was trying to shoot and kill me. Please let me in. So they let him in. And he has, like, this scrape on his arm. And they're like, oh my god, you're infected. And Dean is like, you are infected. Are you kidding me? Like, you are so infected, it's insane. And he's like, I literally swear I'm not. Like, I fell. Like, I swear, like, I'm wicked not infected. So the squad ties him up to a chair, right?
It's so dark.
And Sam is like, wait, this is exactly like my vision. Dean is gonna shoot this guy. So he's like, Dean, I don't think you should, like, kill him. I think we need to give him a moment. Like, the doctor has looked at his blood and has not found any traces yet, but we have to wait 4 hours because it might not show up. Like, it hasn't manifested yet. So we have to wait. So maybe let's just not do it. And Dean's like, well, I don't know. Like, we should do it. We have to kill him because we can't risk him getting stronger and then massacring all of us. And this is a funny scene because I'm like, I don't quite understand why they couldn't just wait. Like, it's really just to build drama. And I think the point is that it's trying to show how, like, how much tension has built, but it doesn't do a very good job of showing that. Like, it just kind of seems like Dean just wants to kill this like, young man.
Yeah.
For no reason.
Yeah. And watching this, knowing what I know of things that happen later, I go, oh, Dean in his Cain moment. Okay.
Yeah. Dean is just wanting to kill this boy for no reason.
The mark of Cain really went, there's a history with this one.
But Dean's like, no, Sam, like, this is dangerous. We have to take him out. Like, he's infected. I know he's infected. And Dean is like, I don't know about this. And then Dean's like, well, I do. And he locks Sam in, like, the medical supply room to stop him from preventing him from killing this boy.
Oh, also earlier, I forgot to mention this. Also earlier, when they're like, oh, shit, we're stuck. What do we do? They're like, yeah, and it doesn't seem like we're gonna have enough firepower. The Sarge says, he's like, this town is full of people who know how to use guns and have them. The firepower you have in your car isn't enough. How the fuck are we gonna get out of here? And they're like, unless we have literally, like, explosives. And Sam looks around the clinic and is like, I could build some Molotov cocktails out of some of these supplies. So when he gets locked in the room and we come back to see him, he's locked in the room making Molotov cocktails.
No, he literally is. He's like, I'm gonna start killing people if I have to, but not this boy. But it seems out of my hands now.
It is also very funny considering that at some point John Winchester was teaching a young Sam and Dean how to make Molotov cocktails.
Maybe the coolest thing John Winchester's ever done.
I mean, he could have learned it on the internet, but no, you know that John was like, you have to learn.
Mm-hmm. So Sam is locked in this room. Dean goes up to this kid. I keep calling him a kid. He's probably his like early 20s, maybe like late teens. But Dean has a gun up to this guy's head and they're freaking out. And Dean goes to pull the trigger and he hesitates and then he doesn't. And he's like, okay, we just have to wait, I guess. You get to live. And I was like, you did that for what?
Because he's dramatic and he's gay.
That he is. So true. So then everyone's like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? Like, they're looking outside. Sam gets out of the little back room, and they're looking outside, and like the townspeople are gathering around this clinic, and they have guns, and it's like, okay, well, clearly they are going to attack. So Sam had like already started building these explosives, but they keep going. So they're like, okay, we're gonna build an arsenal so we can escape the town and get out of here. And Sam goes into the back to like get some more stuff like into that supply room, and the nurse, the young woman, follows him in and locks the door behind her. And she's like, I've been waiting to get you alone so I could do this. She cuts her own hand open, uses a knife to cut Sam's chest, and smears the blood all over him into his wound. So it's they're definitely exchanging some blood and bodily fluids.
That's another mouse tool for Sam that we'll use later.
That we will. And then
I'm thinking of many things right now.
It's dark. It's so dark.
So bad.
So they bust down the door. Dean and Sarge are like, oh, hello? And Dean kills this nurse, like shoots her like 5 times. And he's like, oh, Sam is infected. Oh, cool. Okay. Like, Sam is like, I definitely, like, I got infected. Like, cool. And everyone's like, okay, well, like, we have to kill him, right? And Dean's like, no, I'm not gonna kill him. Like, we're not doing that. And Dwayne Tanner is like, okay, well, like, I wasn't infected. You almost killed me. But he gets to live? And he's like, yeah, he's my brother.
He's like, Sarge, that's my special boy. Shut the fuck up.
Sarge is like, I realize he's your brother, and I'm really, really sorry, but, like, we can't stay here with him. And Dean's like, okay, you know what? Fine. I don't want to do this. I'm not doing it. And Sarge pulls up his gun and points it at Sam. And Dean is like, if you make a move on him, you'll be dead before you hit the ground. And Sam is like, okay. It's fine. Just kill me. It's okay. And Dean's like, no, everyone else here, you guys can leave in our car. I'm going to stay here with Sam. And they're like, okay, what? And Sam was like, no, Dean, like, you need to go. Like, you don't need to stay here. And he's like, no, I do. So they help the others, which is Sarge, Dwayne Tanner, and the doctor, get into...
This is one of our first Sam and Dean double suicide moments. Where they're both like, yes, we'll both die. Like, because this does keep... Because Sam says... He's like, just give me my gun and I'll do it.
Yeah.
And then Dean is like, you know what? No, I'll stay with you. And I'm like, they never discuss it, but like, that's assuming that like
they're both just gonna die.
Sam is gonna kill him. Like, I was like, damn, double homicide. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting, but they help the others get into their car, into the Impala, and Dean and Sam are sitting alone in this empty doctor's office. And Sam is like, Dean, please don't do this. Like, you have your whole life ahead of you. You could just leave. Like, you don't have to do this. And Dean is like, no, Sam, what if I don't want to? Like, I'm tired. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of doing this job. I can't do it anymore. I can't see you be at risk. I can't be at risk. Why is this our responsibility? Etc. He kind of has a bit of a little, like, showing his actual innermost fears. And he's like, what if I don't want my life to continue? Like, what if I'm done? What if I'm good? That can be someone else's problem.
This part was
dark.
Actually upsetting because, first of all, terrible news, son. You got 15 seasons ahead of you. But also knowing what happens in the last episode where he basically says the same thing, you're like, oh no. Oh, this is dark.
Yeah. So as they're kind of having this tearful moment, the doctor walks in and she's like, hey, so maybe you won't have to like have a group suicide because the townsfolk are gone. And they're like, what? And like, they're just all gone. Like, there's no one out there. It's like a ghost town. Like, literally everyone's gone. And they're like, oh. So they're all kind of looking around like, there's literally no one there. Then we cut. It's 5 hours later. And the doctor's like, well, I don't know what happened, but there's still no traces of the virus in Sam's blood. So, like, he wasn't infected. Like, he's fine. And Sam and Dean are both, like, clearly uncomfortable by this because he definitely did get a lot of blood in his blood. So then the team at the medical center is kind of talking, and Dwayne and Sarge are putting their stuff into Sarge's truck. And they're like, okay, well, we're gonna go. You should come with, like, and Dwayne's like to the doctor, he's like, you should really come with us. Like, we can get out of town because we can't explain what's going on here. And she's like, well, no, there has to be someone here to, like, say what happened. And, like, I'm a doctor. People will trust me because I have that, like, acumen to back it up. But, like, you guys go because it's going to be hard to explain. And Sam and Dean are like, okay, well, we're going to leave too. So that was fucked up. Happy we all got to trauma bond together. We're going to go. So everyone kind of goes their separate ways. And
Dean says, and Dean's like, something feels off about this. It feels like this one feels like the one that got away. It's very weird.
Yeah.
Also, the doctor, she also says when she's looking at the blood samples, she doesn't just look at Sam's. She looks at the blood samples from the dead dad and also the mom who they later had to shoot. And she's like, okay, wait. Yeah. I definitely saw like the sulfur residue in those blood cells, and now it's gone. It's like there was nothing there.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
So clearly something's strange. Something's strange and off-putting. So we cut to Dwayne and Sarge. They are driving away. And it's the middle of the night, and Dwayne is like, hey, can you pull over? I'd, like, need to make a call. And Sarge is like, that's kind of weird. I don't have a phone, so if you're gonna do that, you're gonna need to have your own device. And he's like, yeah, don't worry, I got it. This little bitch, Dwayne pulls out this goblet, much like Meg did in season 1. And he slits Sarge's throat, gathers the blood in the goblet, swirls it around. It starts whirlpooling. And then he's like, I don't think any more tests will be necessary. The Winchester boy is definitely immune, as expected. And then Dwayne's eyes turn black, so clearly he's been a demon this whole time. Or possessed by one.
Crazy to me, because, like, they did extract his blood. Oh, they didn't extract his blood?
They did, but they didn't have time to process it. But also, I mean, like, this demon disease is completely different from being possessed by a demon.
Yeah, but that's my point, is, like, wouldn't that... I guess you'd have regular blood if you were possessed. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think...
Or maybe he was possessed at a later time. I don't know.
I mean, it's not the disease. Like, the disease is what gives the sulfur in the blood, but I don't think possession does that.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
I was like, okay.
Yeah, and I'm also like, rest in peace, Sarge. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry, King.
Rest in peace, love. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Rest in peace, Sarge. You would have loved the iPhone 14. So then we cut to Sam and Dean on the shore of this river. Oh, something else. Dwayne is also talking to whoever is talking back to him through this goblet, and he goes, I understand. No survivors. And I was like, okay, so is he going to go back and kill the doctor? Like, is that why he was so insistent that she come with? But then it doesn't show it, so I don't know if that is what is implied, but just something to note.
Or, yeah, I don't know.
So then we cut to Sam and Dean. They are on, like, the shore of a river leaning up against a fence. It's, like, the middle of the day. They're drinking a beer and chatting. And Sam's like, so, were we going to talk about what you said in there? And Dean's like, we really don't have to. And Sam is like, no, because we kind of do. Like, you clearly are having a bit of an issue. And I want to, like, help you through it. Like, you don't have to take care of me. I don't have to be your responsibility. Like, you can do whatever you want. And he's like, no, I can't. He's like, why? He's like, well, the last thing Dad said to me was to protect you. And he's like, yeah, well, he always says that. And then he's like, and that and then the episode kind of, like, ends. So he's going to get to the actual confession of what their dad said in the next episode.
And you're like, if I was watching this on broadcast, I would have screamed, kind of throw up. I would have been like, damn. They knew that they got people by now. Because that was crazy. Yeah, also in that scene, Dean is like, he's like, we travel all over the country. I want to go to the Grand Canyon. And then, is this also the episode where he's like, we should go to Amsterdam?
Yeah, no, yeah, Sam's like, where should we go after this? And he's like, let's go to Amsterdam. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore.
And he's like, did you know that the coffee shops, they don't serve coffee there? I'm like, we get it. I was like, Dean, you're going to love when they legalize weed in a bunch of states. Yeah. That episode, I feel like this is a bad combination of problematic premise, but some very tight writing.
Yeah.
So, also, in a later season, they do bring this back up. I don't know if
really
the disease comes back.
I feel like I definitely remember them talking about this again. I know this is not the last time that this, like, appears.
Yeah, Croatoan virus would not be mentioned again until season 5 episode The End. Yeah. Oh, also fun fact, the guy's name is Mark. He's mostly referred to as Sarge in the episode, even though he's a Marine, and the Marines don't use, they don't have Sergeant or Sarge, so.
That's why I was confused when, like.
Yeah, he also has a tattoo that does not discern the rank of Master Sergeant, so.
I love that.
I like how Dean was like, I'm gay. I don't really know anything about the military, so I'm just going to give you a fun little name.
I'm just going to say things that my dad said when I was growing up.
It's very funny. Obviously, they do make a Night of the Living Dead reference. The thing about Supernaturals, they never make, like, a subtle reference. It's always, like, beat you over the head with it. He's like, yeah, like in Night of the Living Dead. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, they're like, you will understand this. What do we think about this episode? Because, like, I agree with Klaudia in saying, like, the writing and the actual, like, emotional stakes of this episode are really good. Like, it's very enjoyable to watch. I don't know if that necessarily carries over in explaining it. But I also fear that, like, a lot of the things about it, like, compounded with the fact that it's like, oh, this name, this indigenous word is the name of a demon. Also with it being like, oh, scary blood disease. There's a lot that I don't love about the premise of how this was.
Yeah, it's giving together. J.K. Rowling
it's
equating
absolutely
AIDS with being a werewolf a little bit. Also,
you're so right.
In the later episodes when they talk about Croatoan virus, they connected a lot with swine flu. Because remember, early to mid 2000s, swine flu was really big.
That is true.
They do a lot.
Little did they know. They did not know what was coming for them.
I think this episode, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 just because problematic premise, but decent writing. I could agree. Give it more if they didn't do that.
I agree completely. I think that's a good assessment.
Yeah. I was like, I see the vision. Could have been executed better, but that's kind of this whole show, isn't it?
Yeah, I will say one thing I really liked. I noticed that was like distinct about this episode. The score was really good.
Yeah, it was slaying the house boost.
It was very weird. Like, normally the score on this show, it's not that it's like bad. It just doesn't really stand out. But in this episode, I feel like there were a lot of moments where I was like, oh, okay, like they put the musicality into it.
Yeah. It's the next episode that has Supermassive Black Hole in it, right?
Yes, it is. Speaking of.
Let's discuss the next episode because it goes right into this one. And up at the front, I'm going to say this one is also very problematic. It involves a character that we did have discussed before.
It was basically a jump scare too, because it was like significantly into the episode. I was not expecting it.
I mean, they spoil it though, because they give who the guest stars are in the credits that go across the screen. If you're paying attention to the names that go across the screen at the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot he's in this.
Well, famously, I watch at 1.5 speed, and I also was watching on my phone screen, so it was so tiny. I was like, I can't see or read or do anything.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I would have been mad if it kind of does spoil it for you when you see his name go right across.
Yeah, but we won't spoil it here because we're the Mystery Spotcast. We have integrity.
Yeah. So yeah, from the jump, I'm just gonna say, this episode also very problematic. This episode is also very important to the lore.
And it's also, like, it's so frustrating, too, because much like the last episode, it's really slaying until it's not.
Yeah, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. No. It's like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. Like, it has a slay character, and then it's like, actually, dum-dum.
Yeah.
I'm pointing at, I'm coming to attack you.
Yeah. So, the episode opens... there's this guy, his name is Scott Carey. He looks like this bedraggled, tired white man, he's kind of giving a little bit serial killer vibes, a little bit. He's sitting in a therapist's office. For the Bright Sessions girlies out there, he's exactly what I imagined Damien to look like. That is exactly. I was like, oh yeah, when I watched this originally, I was a Bright Sessions girly, and I was like, yeah, this is what Damien looks like. So he's sitting in the office of a therapist named Dr. George Waxler, and he's like, so I started to get these weird headaches, and I got this ability, and it's really freaky. Whenever I touch something, if I want to, I can electrocute it. And Dr. Waxler is like, are you sure about that, or do you just like think that you can do it? And he's like, no, I know I can. I did it to my neighbor's cat. And he's like, do you want me to prove it now? He's like, shake my hand. And the doctor's like, anyway, like asks him another question.
Also, the girlies, I must say, I love how the early 2000s, the early aughts, how obsessed they were with herding cats.
Yeah.
Like, guys, what is wrong with you? Quickly. I think that there's, like, I've read, like, a couple things about it, how it's very much like, oh, well, when you hurt, like, when some, like, people don't value cats as much as they do, like, dogs. So when a cat dies, it's like, oh, you did something crazy, but it's not like you're irredeemable. And I'm like, yeah. Interesting.
But in media, when it starts out with, like, killing a dog, like House of Cards did.
Yeah. It's like, whenever, oh, you're evil.
They're like, oh, you're a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with a cat, it's like, oops, haha.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're done.
I was like, actually, I will come to your house and kill you.
Yeah. This post was made by the Cat Lover Gang.
Yeah. This post was made by Peach. Shout out to Peach.
Peach is my cat. If you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you will see her.
Peach.
Peach.
Yeah. Peach, sometimes you can hear Peach in the back of the podcast.
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, she's recently started watching television, so hopefully...
She likes Bluey.
She does like Bluey a lot.
My cats, they don't like TV. They really just don't give a fuck.
As they should.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've never put on anything specific. Anyways, so it cuts to Scott. He's walking through the dark parking lot, like, towards his car, and he's, like, walking in, like, a back alley beside a train track, whatever. I'm like, where the fuck is this therapist office? Then there are, like, two trains they pass, and there's this dark figure in the shadows who's definitely following him. And he, like, unlocks his car, and then he sees the person standing behind him in the car window, and he turns around, and the person stabs him in the chest with a knife. And he's just, like, blood gushing everywhere, and he immediately dies. His body, like, slumped against the side of the car. And then we get, like, supernatural. So... we now cut back to exactly where we dropped off in the last episode, the side of the lake where Dean is revealing what John said to him before he died. And Dean is like, so Dad told me something before he died, and made me promise about it. And Sam's like, what? And he's like, he told me to protect you. And Sam's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean... you say that all the time. He's like, no. But he said, I also have to save you. And then if I can't, that I have to kill you. And Sam was like, excuse me? What the fuck? The fuck does that mean? What did he know? Did he know the yellow-eyed demon's plan? What the fuck does that mean? And Dina's like, and Dina's like, I honestly really don't know. I just made him a promise, and I don't even know if I was supposed to tell you that. And Sam's like, oh, so I'm just gonna he just expected that I was gonna just go turn to the dark side. And I just keep thinking about how they did originally base this on Star Wars. They are in their Obi-Wan and Anakin era, unfortunately.
I also like how they're like, we need to make sure that the people have a cultural touchstone so they can understand what's going on, because they're too dumb to understand.
Yeah.
Oh no, I have some sort of affliction and I might be messed up, because the viewers won't understand that unless we can relate it to Han Solo.
Yeah, I was like, okay. So, and Dean is like, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. Dad didn't want me to tell you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. And like, just like, give me some time. Like, this has been really hard. And Sam's like, bitch. And they kind of like leave it at that. It's very funny. We cut to Sam who is walking out of a motel by himself. And he goes up to the Impala and he doesn't get in it. He goes to the car next to it and steals it. And he goes to this abandoned building, 5637 Monroe Street, that he has on a piece of paper. And he searches outside the building. He makes sure everything is clear. And he sneaks around to the back. He picks the lock and he walks in. And then he sets off a tripwire and it blows him up. And there's like blood all over the screen. And there's just
the funniest shot too of his boot, like his gay little Chelsea boot that he always wears that has just like smoke coming out of it. Yeah. So he literally knocked his socks off.
Yeah, it's very funny. You just see the shoe, and there's a bright light shining through a window. And then it stops and we see a young woman sitting up in bed and she's sweating and she's out of breath, and clearly this is a vision that she just had. And there's a man sleeping next to her and he's like, hey honey, like what's wrong, whatever. And she's like, oh, I had another nightmare. And clearly she's had a vision of Sam. We cut back to Sam. He was walking into the roadhouse. He is by himself. He's nervous and he is really scared, and he goes up to Ellen. And Ellen's like, not surprised to see you, girly. And because Dean has been calling constantly to be like, where is Sam? Why did you leave him alone? She's like, what's going on between the two of you? And Sam's like, so anyway, how's Joe doing? And Ellen's like, I don't really know, because after the job she did with you two, she wanted to continue hunting, and I said, not under my roof, and she walked out, and I haven't seen her in weeks.
Joe, listen, I'm proud of Joe for being her own woman, but I'm also like, call your mom. Just, please, I'm begging you. Yeah. Just let her know you're good.
I mean, she does. She sends a postcard now and then so that she knows she's alive.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm just like, if my mom was Ellen, I'm like, we would be hanging out every day.
And Ellen and Sam's like, oh, I'm really sorry. And Ellen's like, it's not your fault. Like, clearly there's more going on there. And also, like, you know, my husband dying, that is also not your fault either. And I also forgave John Winchester a long time ago for what happened. Like, it's okay. And she says, she's like, but I don't think that your father ever forgave himself. And Sam's like, so anyway, I don't really have time to deal with all that baggage, and he asks her, he's like, what actually happened on that hunt? And then Ellen's like, so anyway, how are you?
Because I think Sam is kind of woman coded, because like they both have the same method of deflection, and I'm obsessed with it.
It's very funny. So Sam's like, hey, so on the low, there's a lot of weird stuff happening with the psychic people. So I need Ash to do a nationwide search for the people like me. Their mom died in a nursery fire, all that kind of stuff. And Ash is like, well, we already did that search, but the problem is not everybody fits that profile. And he's like, just look for those people. That we'll just start there. And he comes up with 4 names, who are Sam, Max Miller, who we already met. He was the guy who, what do you call it? He could do telekinesis. Andy Gallagher, who was the guy who could convince people to do whatever he wanted. Shout out to the Damien Bright Sessions fans for that one as well. Here's a quick plug for the book of Neon Darkness. And then the name of Scott Carey. And Sam's like, oh, like, who is this guy? Where does he live? And Ash is like, well, he's in this plot on a cemetery in Lafayette, Indiana. And he died like a month ago. And he was stabbed to death in a parking lot. And the cops, they have no suspects and they don't know what the fuck happened. And Sam's like, okay, I gotta go figure this one out. And Ellen is like, I have to call Dean and let him know where you are just so that he knows you're okay. And he's like, please do not do that. I gotta go my own way.
What about us?
No, literally,
what
that is them in this episode.
What about what if I just performed that entire song right now during the podcast?
So he's like, I know he means well, but like I gotta figure out who I am. And like Dean, he can't protect me, like whatever. So it cuts to Sam, who is visiting Scott's father, and he's pretending to be one of his friends from high school. And the father is like, yeah, he changed a lot in the last year. He got these headaches and nightmares. He got really paranoid. He really got really depressed. I tried to get him help. Nothing worked. And he locked himself in his room for days. And then when he's searching through the room, Sam finds some like bottles of medication, and he takes one because he's like, oh, there's a name of a doctor on here. That's a lead. And then he sees something inside his closet, and he looks behind the clothes, and there's like a serial killer fucking collage on the wall of like eyes from like magazines and stuff taped to the wall and colored in yellow, just yellow eyes all around. And he's like, oh shit, he's one of the kids connected to the yellow eye demon, isn't he? Fuck. So we cut to Sam. He's walking back to his motel room. He notices someone is sneaking up behind him, and he turns around and he like grabs them, and it's a woman, and he pushes her up against the wall, and he's like, who are you? Why are you following me? And it's the girl who had the nightmare about him. And she's like, listen, I just came here to tell you you're in danger. And he's like, what?
I will say about her,
she's slaying.
She is so slay. She's like the best part of this episode.
Oh, I love her. I was like, oh, I miss her.
I do too.
She's very cool.
No, because you know what? She would have stopped the angels from falling out of heaven. Spoiler alert.
Absolutely. So we go into the motel room, and she's like, hi, my name is Ava Wilson. Listen, I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. I've been having these weird nightmares. They started about a year ago. I didn't think they were anything. And like a month ago, I had a nightmare. I saw a guy get stabbed in a parking lot. And then a few days later, I saw an article in the paper about this guy getting stabbed in a parking lot. And I realized, oh my God, my visions are coming true. And she's like, last night I had another nightmare. I saw you die. And Sam's like, oh, you're one of us. And she's like, one of us? One of who? And he's like, yeah, you're like, we all have psychic powers and we're involved with this fucking demon. And she's like, okay, maybe you're the crazy one. And he's like, did your mom die in a fire? And she's like, no, my mom lives in Palm Beach. And he's like, okay, so Ava's one of the people who doesn't fit the pattern. We cut to Ellen. She's on the phone with Dean, and she's like, listen, Sam didn't want me to call you, but... And Dean's like, yeah, I know. And she's like, we can't always protect the ones we love, but I think we should try. Anyway, Sam is in Lafayette, Indiana. Bye!
Ugh, Ellen is literally so slay. Like, I am obsessed with Ellen.
She is in her snitch era, though.
And she is in her snitch era, but also it's a good thing she was in this instance.
Yeah.
Ellen has such a good... She's like, listen, I know when to hold them, and I know when to fold them.
Yeah, she's doing all the mom labor here. So... we cut back to Ava, and she's begging Sam. She's like, just leave town. Like, I don't want you to die. Like, please, just leave town. And he's like, I can't. Like, I have to, like, look for answers. And she's like, what? She's like, I drove here all the way from Peoria, Illinois. I'm about to get married, whatever, to save you. I'm going to go back to the real world. Fine, if you want to die that way, whatever. And she like grabs her purse to leave. And he's like, if you leave now, you're never going to know the truth about your nightmares either. So we cut to that Ava has now made an appointment with Dr. Waxler, the doctor who was on the medication and the doctor that Scott saw in the beginning.
This is some crazy bullshit
that
Sam Winchester's getting into.
She's pretending to be a patient while Sam is crawling around the outside of the building to get in and steal the records about Scott Carey. And he's like, why are you here? And she's like, I'm just really anxious. Like, she's just saying things. It's very funny. And she looks over to the side. She sees, like, Sam walking across the window. And she's like, I gotta drop my croissant. And then the therapist is like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, one time when I was a kid, I ate 8 packets of Pop Rockets and then I drank a can of Coke. Does that count as a suicide attempt? And the guy's like, what the fuck?
It's like, Miss Ma'am, I don't think that is true, but okay.
He's like, okay. We got back to the motel. She's like kind of hyperventilating, freaking out. And he's like, Sam's like, are you okay? Like, everything. She's like, yeah, I just posed as a patient so that you could steal someone's medical records. Yeah, I'm doing great. That was crazy. And I was like, so true. Same, girl.
She is, Ava, I'm obsessed with you.
Yeah. So there's a recording of the sessions. It was like, bright sessions moment.
Oh my god, this is just like the Magnus Archives.
No, please. No, not the Magnus Archives. Jonathan Sims, is that you?
This is that's actually the villain at the end of this episode who they're fighting.
The yellow-eyed demon is Jonathan Sims, not clickbait.
I feel like that bitch would try to influence him. And I feel like it would work, because Jonathan Sims, you are a feeble-minded man. I'm so sorry. Not real person. Real person, Jonathan Sims.
Jonathan Sims
You're
fictional.
Slaying. Jonathan Sims fictional. No one's having a worse day than you.
So Sam and Ava, they start listening to this recording. And in the recording, Scott is like, yeah, so I keep having these dreams. There's this yellow-eyed demon, and he tells me that there's plans for me and that there's a war coming, and the people that are like me are soldiers, and everything's about to change. And then the scene cuts to Dean, who is cruising by the motel on the outside, and he sees Sam in the window. And he's like, oh, thank God, he's okay. And he looks from a distance, and then he sees Sam move out of the window, and then he sees Ava. And he's like, Sam, all right, maybe you're doing better than I thought you were doing. Because he thinks, of course, because his brain, you know, he's a man. That's all he thinks of. Yeah. Meanwhile, Ava and Sam are listening to this, like, deeply traumatic thing. They're like, holy shit. It cuts back to them listening, and then all of a sudden, the window of the, like, full panel window of the motel shatters, and Sam and Ava, like, they get down and they, like, duck behind the table, and you see someone with a rifle with a silencer on it, and you see, who is it? It's Gordon Walker, Sterling K. Brown.
Oh, I know it's gonna be crazy when he shows up, because here's the thing that sucks is he's always acting his ass off, but it's always a little bit racist.
Yeah, you're like, why did they write him this way? But he really pops off with it. So last we left Gordon, they left him, like, tied up in a shack because he was about to, like, kill a bunch of people, basically a bunch of vampires who were like, hey, we're vegetarian, we're not gonna kill people. And he was like, no, you're monsters, you're going down, bye. And then Sam and Dean were like, no, like, we should you can go listen to us talk about that episode. But the last time they left him, that's where we were. And so you're like, why is he trying to kill Sam other than, like, revenge? But he's not really a revenge kind of guy, so what's going on here? He is on the roof of a building across the street. Dean sees him and, like, runs up on top of the roof, starts beating the shit out of him. And then Gordon manages to, like, get the upper hand, start beating the shit out of Dean. And I'm like, it's very violent.
Yeah, and then I'm like, go Gordon, get his ass.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wait, I'm not supposed to be rooting for him.
Yeah. And then it cuts to Sam and Ava. They are walking onto the roof of the building where Gordon was, and Sam finds the rounds, and he's like, oh wow, these are from, like, there was a suppressor on this rifle, like this was heavy duty. And Ava's like, how do you know that? He's like, I'm not crazy. I just watch a lot of TV shows.
He literally says, what show does he say? He says,
TJ Hooker.
Yeah, he says, I watch a lot of TJ Hooker. Okay, girl.
I'm like, what year is this? And then he calls Dean, and he's like, hey, bestie, things are not looking great. And Dean's like, yeah, I know. It's not looking that great. I know you're in Indiana, whatever. And he's like, yeah, so I need your help.
He's like, yeah, we're really in Funky Town here.
Yeah, and he's like, it's a pretty funky town here. And he's like, okay, I'll give you this address. Come meet me. And it's 5637 Monroe Street, which was what was in the which was what was in the vision, in Ava's vision. And we see Dean as he's talking, and Gordon is holding a gun to his head, as he's trying to stay calm on the phone with Sam. So Sam hangs up. He turns to Ava, and he's like, we gotta go. Dean's in trouble. And she's like, what do you mean? He's like, he gave me a code. That Funky Town, that means that that means he like someone's holding a gun to his head.
And he's like, don't worry, I didn't make that one up. He made up that code.
Yeah,
word. Don't worry.
He's like, there's a long story behind that one. She's like, you guys have code words? Like, who the fuck are you people? And he's like, you need to go home and get out of harm's way, like right now. I don't think he knows that it's Gordon. Right?
No, he does not.
Okay. So yeah. So Sam's like, hey, Ava, it's not safe anymore. You got to go home. And she's like, why? Like, I could help you, whatever. He's like, no, I promise. You got to go home. We cut to the building, and Gordon is talking to Dean, and he's like, listen, I mean, I would want to get revenge on you guys because that was an asshole move of you, but, like, I'm a hunter, not a killer. And your brother, Sam, he's fair game because he's a psychic. And he's like, what? Why? He's my brother. And he's like, so I was in Louisiana. I was performing an exorcism on this teenage girl. She was this low-ranking demon. And she accidentally said something about a coming war. And that the demon has soldiers fighting in his war. But the soldiers are human. And they're fighting on Hell's side. And that's pretty fucked up. Then
he says something so foul. So fucking embarrassing for the writers of this show.
Yeah, I was like, Sterling K. Brown, how did you say this? And he said, these soldiers are going to be the special children. And you're like, really? That was the name you gave? Okay.
Yeah. And then he's like, how can they be traitors to their own race?
I was like,
which is like, again, it's just interesting because I'm like, very interesting that they have literally their only black character.
Yeah.
Be the one to be like, I'm going to talk about how this is a racial tension thing. And I'm like, so are we, I'm just trying to figure out what this is an allegory for. Because if they're trying to make it an allegory for being a race traitor, it's not going well.
It's like, supernatural. I fear you have jumped off the deep end with this one. And it probably wasn't even on purpose. It was just them thinking, oh, that's a Yasin Slay line to have. But I was like, is it?
Yeah, it's just weird. And it feels so like checkmate, like the way that he says it and the way it's filmed, it's so clearly that they're like, this is our trump card, and
you're like, it's not slaying, I fear. So these are going to be our special children, and they have psychic abilities, and the demon has plans for them. And the demon said that Gordon knew one of them, Sam, and Gordon's like, yeah, so I knew all about Sam's visions. I have my own Roadhouse connections. You guys aren't that fucking slick. And Dean's like, what the fuck? And he's like, all these special children, they're going to be killers. So why wouldn't I get them? And Dean is like, okay, but what happened to the girl that they were possessing? And he was like, she didn't make it.
Yeah, as he was, like, doing the exorcism, he's like, yeah, I was doing an exorcism, and he was like, oh, actually, I decided to torture her to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, and what's ironic about this is Dean's like, oh, that's horrible, but, like, Dean does that exactly to demons later on. I'm like, you guess you don't, like, torturing them, whatever. You're like, what about the people inside? What about that? It's very dark. And then he starts to, like, explain to Dean, like, the trap he has set for him. He's like, I've set up some tripwires in this building. He's like, I know what Sam's gonna do. He's gonna come. He's not gonna come through the front. He's gonna come through the back. He's gonna scope out the building. And there's gonna be a tripwire that will do an explosion. Now, and Dean's like, he's not stupid enough to fall for a tripwire. And he's like, and he's not. Because I know that he's not stupid enough. Which is why there's a second tripwire. And I was like, are you home aloneing him? Is that what you're doing? And he's like, that'll trigger an explosion. Dean's freaking out. He's now, like, been gagged. And he's just, like, sitting there like, is he going to make me watch as he kills Sam? Holy shit. So we cut to Sam. And just as Gordon described, and just as we saw in the vision, Sam, he searches around the outside of the building. He goes to the back door. He walks right in, just like the vision. Dean is gagged. He's sitting in the chair. Gordon is sitting next to him, like, expectantly looking around. Sam looks through the window, sees them like that. He picks the lock. He goes through the back door. He goes through slowly. The first explosion goes off and breaks down part of the wall. And Dean is, like, screaming and crying. It's, like, really awful. And he's like, there's tears coming out of his eyes. It's really whatever. And then a few seconds later, there's a second explosion. And Gordon's like, he's going to take his sniper rifle and go make sure Sam is actually dead. And he sees Sam's shoe, just like in the vision, on the ground. And he's like, yeah, I assume that he's dead. And then you just hear a click. And Sam is behind him with a gun.
Sam said, I am playing 4D chess.
Yeah. And he's like, drop the gun. And Gordon drops the gun, and then he, like, whips around and punches Sam. And Sam's like, enough of that. And he gets him on the ground. And he's, like, holding the sniper rifle at him. And Gordon's like, do it. Show your brother the killer you really are, Sammy. And Sam's, like, about to do it. And
Gordon has also called him Sammy this entire episode. Anytime he references him.
It's very funny. And Sam is, like, he's about to do it. And then he stops himself. And he just, like, hits Gordon over the head with the back of the rifle. And he goes, it's not Sammy, it's Sam. And he goes and he unties Dean. And Dean's like, we gotta go get Gordon. He's gonna come in here and fucking kill us. And Sam's like, it's fine. Already took care of him. And so they, like, run out of the house to their car, and suddenly Gordon is up and at him, fucking shooting at them, like, power walking toward them, about to shoot them. And he's got two guns, and Sam and Dean are like, oh shit. And they're running, and they hide behind a patch of tall grass. And Dean's like, Sam, I thought you had him covered. And Sam is like, I promise, I got this. And Dean's like, what the fuck? And they're hiding. And Gordon gets to, like, the intersection. Like, he came out of the house and went to the intersection of where the road is, and 5 police squad cars show up and are like, drop your weapon. And they search his car, and obviously they see all these fucking sniper weapons, and they're like, and Sam goes to Dean and is like, yeah, he's gonna be in prison for at least several years, so we're good now. And this is where the episode takes a turn, because you're like, oh, really, Sam? And Sam is like, yeah, I sent an anonymous tip. And Dean's like, oh, what an upstanding citizen you are. And I'm like, and this is where I cancel you both.
Now listen, because here's what I say: 10 out of 10 for thinking ahead, Sam. 0 out of 10 for calling the police in any situation. Yeah. But especially, once again, the show ending with our one black character getting arrested.
Yeah.
Like, girl, what is going on?
They were like, our one black character, he's a murderer and he's going to jail. You're like, oh, that's... And like...
Love
yeah.
it.
Oh, I don't when this conversation happens. I feel like we flash to a car at some point, or Gordon and Dean are waiting, and at some point Gordon is like, if you were in a car with a young Hitler, and you're like, oh, are we gonna do this?
No, yeah.
You're like, with a young Hitler, in his awkward artist days, but you knew what he was gonna do. You'd kill him, right? And Dean's like, okay, but this is different. Like, I know Sam wouldn't do that. He's like, Sam isn't racist. Well, actually he is, because he just called the police on a black man. So, you know what? Eyes are open. He does get possessed by Satan later, so spoiler alert. But he's like, I wouldn't do that. He's like, Sam's not the same. And he's like, but it is the same. It is. So it's like, you really can't blame Gordon sometimes, because you're like, yeah, okay. Now, the preemptive killing and torturing of people is not great, but here we have the issue that often comes up, the Saw Gerrera problem, where we're like, here's a marginalized person who is kind of right, but we're gonna make them the most vile fucking murderer ever. And you're like, whoa, what the fuck? It's not good. Sterling K. Brown, he's acting the shit out of this for sure.
Once again, always exciting to see him. Wish he was not like this in this show.
Yeah, but this episode being like, we did it, guys. We sent him to jail. You're like, oh, this is not good. Sam, I fear you are being canceled. You are being canceled. See, when Dean handled it, he was like, we handle this without the state. I'm gonna tie you up in the thing, and then you can't come and murder us. And Sam's like, and what if I involve the state? And you're like, really? You dumb bitch.
Speaking of bitch.
Yeah, this is Sam in his fucking flap era.
Speaking of bitch, we are not the only ones calling him that in this episode.
Yeah, this is, funnily enough, this is actually a big supernatural lore drop moment. We get in the car, Dean calls Ellen, and he's like, hey, Gordon told me that there's people at the Roadhouse who know about Sam's fucking visions. Is there a leak here? What the fuck? And Ellen's like, no, I didn't tell anybody anything. Joe wouldn't, Ash wouldn't. But she's like, there's like tons of hunters here. They're all really good at investigating things. It's only a matter of time before they all figure something out. They're using patterns. I don't control what they do, Dean. And he's like, no, like, Gordon, somebody must have told somebody something, because Gordon said he had Roadhouse connections. And she's like, I wouldn't do that to you guys. And they keep driving, and Sam tries to call Ava, the other psychic girl, and he's not getting through. And he keeps getting to voicemail, and he's like, and Dean's like, who is this? Whatever. He's like, do you like her? And he's like, no. She's married. I'm just worried about her. And
she's engaged, because earlier in the episode she is like, what am I doing here? I'm supposed to be writing like invitations to my wedding. Why am I like helping you break into some office? What am I doing?
Yeah. So and this is the second time that Dean's like, I want to go on a vacation. Oh, I'm sorry. This is when Dean goes. Last time he said, I want to go to the Grand Canyon. But this is the time he goes, I want to go to Amsterdam. He's like, this job is hard. We don't get paid. We don't get any vacation. Like, can I take some time off? And Sam's like, no, I want to keep hunting. I want to figure out my shit. And this is the first time that Dean calls Sam bitch, and Sam answers with jerk. And that's an ongoing thing that keeps happening. And they're happy and together again. But Sam is like, I still have a really bad feeling about Ava, so we need to go to Peoria and check on her. And he's like, fine. So we cut to Ava's house, and Sam and Dean are like, no one's answering the door. So they break into her house, and they're like, hello, and there's nobody there. They go to the bedroom. They find her fiance dead with blood all over him in the bedroom, and they're like, and she's nowhere to be found, but there's sulfur all along the window, and there's like definitely a demon's been here. And at the foot of the bed, they just find Ava's engagement ring, and Sam's like, oh shit. And then the episode ends.
Yeah, this is
episode.
Again, like, it's an episode that, like, if they did not have the racial politics as they were, this would be a really good episode.
Yeah.
And I fear that is a problem every time Gordon shows up, is that it's like, he is a really compelling character. He's very interesting, but the way the narrative positions him is just so negative and so, like, it plays into so many stereotypes.
Yeah, it's not good. And like the last shot is like them, like multiple police being like, hands above your head, get on the ground. You're like, holy shit.
And I think like also something I will say, like, vis-a-vis the optics of it, is that this was from what, 2006 or 2007, I believe.
This is 2007 at this
point. 2007. So yeah, so like, I will say this was before we really had like the ability to have these like viral moments of like police brutality. Not saying that it didn't exist, because it absolutely did. So I can see on the part of the writers, I can see how they would not be thinking of the racial politics in that context. But that being said, like, it's still like, there was never a point in history where that was not a thing. So it's just a little, but I mean, to be sure,
another example of, and this is why you just have to diversify your writer's room. Because a writer's room full of white people would think that
exactly
in 2007.
Yeah.
You know? And you're like, oh, God. And they probably just wrote it for whoever. And then they were like, yeah, we'll cast a black guy, sure. And then you're like, that changes the entire tenor of this. Now, granted, even if it was a white guy, even so. If it was a white guy, he definitely would have had more of like a white guy serial killer vibe, which I think would have actually worked better.
Yeah.
Because, like, the interesting part of his character is like who hunts the hunter, you know what I mean? And like having like almost like a white guy Zodiac killer, like serial killer vibe, I think could have actually worked for the storytelling much better. When they added in that he was black, it was like, oh my God, why would you do this? You know, if we lived in a better world or there were more black characters, I think, you know, it would be like, great, anybody can be anybody, sure. It's equality. Anybody can be evil.
It's just the fact that we're like, we're 2 seasons in and we've really only had one major black character and he's like this. Like, okay, cool.
It's not good. It's not good. Yeah. I will say in this episode there was some Yas and Sai music, at least. In the background in the background, in the Roadhouse, they were playing Supermassive Black Hole by Muse. We are fully in our Twilight era at this point.
We love.
We got White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, which was played in a really cool way, and like the scene really was very slay with the song. I was like, damn, okay, all right. Again, the power of Warner Brothers helping to make this so we can use all these songs. Yeah, 2 episodes that on the surface are pretty cool, and then really go, you know, this show would be a lot better if it wasn't written by white people. Yeah, but also both of these episodes, I think, are they're very pivotal to the whole demon blood pot thing. We now know that Sam he's a special child.
He's a special little guy, which we knew. We didn't need to be told that he was a special little guy, but...
Yeah, he's a special child who went to school in Palo Alto.
He's special in so many ways. There's many things about him.
Yeah. Well, actually, in this episode, I think, because Dean's like, yeah, I think we should like take a vacation or whatever. And Sam's like, yeah, I tried to run away from this life, and it didn't fucking work out so great. So maybe we should just lean in.
Oh, man.
Not his Sheryl Sandberg era. Oh, that's why he's in Palo Alto. He was fired.
I will say, for the positives for this episode, Ava Wilson is a girl boss.
She's like...
I'm very excited to see, like, I'm very excited to see them be like, oh, here's like a normal person in this world who's completely like put off by it. Like, who's completely like, now what the fuck is going on, in a very like realistic way. Because I feel like a lot of the times when bad things happen to people, they're very much like from a place of trauma where it's like, my husband just died, or someone I know just had this terrible accident. She is one of the first people that we see coming in who's like, hey, something weird just happened to me, but like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like,
although the other guy, the guy who can influence people, he's like, it's kind of weird, but you know, it's kind of slay. So, like, I don't know. It's fine.
I just think it's like, for Ava, it's like, because her whole life is not really being controlled by these things. Like, her whole life didn't change. Like, she seemed like she had a pretty happy, normal life before these happened. It's getting dark for her.
Yeah, it's gonna get real dark for her.
Let's cheer for Ava. 3 cheers for Ava. Let's go. Ava, Ava, Ava. On that note, thank you so much for listening. For more cursed supernatural content, follow us on social media at Mystery Spotcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also ask us cursed supernatural questions in our TikTok Q&A or by emailing us at themysteryspotcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy listening to us suffer, please rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Overcast. It really helps people discover our show, boosts our analytics, etc., etc. And if you want to hear more from us, we are 2 of the co-hosts of RuPaul's Pod Race, a queer Star Wars podcast. We will see you 2 Tuesdays from now for more slaying people, queer baiting things, and the supernatural business.